Hey guys, Ben BigStuff here. So today we're going to be going over our new shift retards configuration and how it works on our new version 2.5 firmware update. If you have version 2.4 earlier, you will not get all the goodies here as far as setting up your shift retard. So by all means, update the box, get the new version 2.5 firmware in there, and you will have the ability to do all these real cool shift retards as far as how all this logic goes. So first thing is you can be online with the ECU here, you can be offline, it doesn't matter, but you're going to want to come over here to the ignition settings section, go to spark modifier selection, and you're going to want to turn on the gear shift retards. Now, why do we want to actually have a gear shift timing retard? It's because especially in drag racing, when you are going to 7, 8, 9,000 RPM, a lot of times when you drop back down in RPM, you're going back to an area of the engine where it's making a lot more torque, which is power. So it's going to want to hammer the tire down. It may want to actually try to spin. So you're trying to calm down the engine enough just so that you can get through that shift, pull the power out, ramp it back in as quick as possible so you can keep on accelerating down the track as fast as possible. So it's very common, been around forever. So here's how I set it up on our ECU now. So you're going to first turn on inside the spark modifier selection. Then if I come back over here, you're now going to see it's actually listed. So ignition settings, gear shift retards. Now inside here, you're going to have two different ways to do it, either race mode or street mode. We're going to talk about the race mode first. In the settings here, you're going to be able to configure it for either a trans-desired gear mode or a gear calculation mode. So the trans-desired gear is actually tied to our auto shifter. So most drag race guys that we work with use the auto shifter if they're having an automatic transmission, and the auto shifter will be outputting the auto shift parameters based on how it's programmed to shift in the next gear. So if you have a power glide or a turbo 400, 2-speed or a 3-speed, again, it's very simple on how it actually works. We're going to show you that right now. But the gear retard can be tied to that trans-desired gear mode from the auto shifter. It can also just be tied to a standard gear calculation, and the way that the ECU calculates the gear is very simple, and we're going to talk about that as well. So either way, when we go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and so on, during those changes when you're going to be able to apply how the shift retard works, okay? So if I come over here, let's talk about the trans-desired gear first. If I come over here to System, Operating Configuration, down here is the auto shifter. Now, if it's grayed out, that simply means that this pin is not available for use for the auto shifter because in the pin configuration section, it is not allowed. So I'm going to close this back out. System, pin configuration. Here we go. Shift solenoid A. I need to click on auto shift, AS/general purpose output. Okay. Now, if I go back into my operating configuration section, here we go. Now it's open and available. Okay. So in this example, the first gear shift RPM is going to be 7,500 and the second gear shift RPM is going to be 7,500. So this is the 1-2 shift 75. This is the 2-3 shift 75. So let's talk about real quick how it knows what gear it's going to be in. Okay. At 7,500 RPM from 1 to 2, we're going to enable it. This hysteresis is 400. Okay, so what that simply means is that output is going to be on for at least 400 RPM, and then it's going to go down below 7,100. Okay, that's going to indicate that we are at second gear. This hysteresis drop is what actually shows that we are in a different gear. Okay, so the trans-desired gear, though, when we go from 1 to 2, happens immediately. So 1 to 2 hits, the gear shift retard is going to hit immediately as soon as I say, hey, I want to go from 1 to 2. Okay. So now what's going to happen is the auto shift is going to go way down from 400 RPM above this. So it's 7,100 RPM. We're going to reset. You can also apply at least a half-second delay, okay, to this output. So as soon as it makes this hysteresis, you can apply a time for it as well. If you have a very loose torque converter that doesn't drop a lot of RPM, you can say, you know what, you're going to satisfy too fast on the hysteresis. Let's give you an amount of time that you also have to wait before you can go to the 2-3. All right. So the 1-2 is triggered. We now apply, in this case, a 2-degree shift retard amount, and we're going to ramp it back in over 1/10 of a second. Okay. So now you're going down the racetrack, you're in second gear, you now hit the 2-3 shift, which again is at 7,500 RPM, the trans-desired gear is going to go from 2 to 3, boom. So now this shift amount is going to hit, which is 6 degrees, and it's going to be ramped out and ramped back in 1/10 of a second. And that's it. So our 3-speed is now done. We have gone down the track. The auto shifter is outputted like it should, and the shift retards have been applied. Okay, that's how the auto shifter works in conjunction with this trans-desired gear. The trans-desired gear is simply in the background. It is produced by the auto shifter. Okay, so if you had a 2-speed transmission, you would come over here and just to the auto shifter and say, I've got a 2-speed. Okay, so obviously you're only going to have 1 RPM you're going to adjust. It'd be the same thing over here in the gear shift retard. If I only have a 2-speed, I'm just simply going to have 1 amount I'm going to play with. Okay, but the most common are definitely 3 speeds transmissions for what we do. If you have more, you can just simply adjust them and and go on down the list here to make those adjustments. Okay. You can also have the ability to, I'm going to close this out now that you understand how the trans-desired gear works. I'm going to close this out. So now you also have the ability to add specific conditions to this. So if I wanted to add more conditions to just the base conditions of what that trans-desired gear number is, I can enable the custom port editor. That's what the CP stands for, custom port editor. If I enable this, system custom port editor, okay, now you're going to see here a gear shift retard. And what this is that ignition modifier for the CP condition for the gear shift retard. So if I enabled this, okay, this is where it says gear shift retard ignition. That's the name. I can change this name if I want to inside here to something else by clicking on this icon right here. Okay, set an alias name. But if I turn this on, I can say, you know what? I'm just for as an example. Okay, if I turn this off, then it's disabled. If I turn it on, there's a green light, a green button here. Power on is going to be off, and my active is on. So I'll also need to have a 30% greater than throttle, and I'll also have to have greater than 20 pounds of boost in order for the retards to be enabled. Okay, so you can configure up to 4 conditions inside this logic before this even works. Okay, very powerful stuff. You can come in here and choose any of these options here that make sense of what you're trying to do here. Okay, but you can have this logic tied to the shift retard working as well, versus just being tied to the trans-desired gear calculation from the auto shifter. Okay, so I'm going to turn this back off, close that out. You can also, I'm going to disable this. You can also say I want a minimum amount of the SR2 timer running as well. So let's just say I actually want to wait X amount of time after the race timer starts. I can plug in 2 seconds, I can plug in 1 second, I can plug in 5 seconds, whatever you want to do. You can just say, I don't want this to actually trigger too early, too late. I'm sorry, not necessarily too late, but just too early based on this value here, okay? So very adjustable on how you want to apply it. It's very simple. You're going to have these little question marks here that'll give you an example of how fast the timing will come in and how the retard amount works. Okay, so very simple in how this stuff works as far as that trans-desired gear with these conditions. Okay, the other one for the race mode is gear calculation. Now, what this means is if I come down here, you're going to see here it thinks we're in gear 1. The gear calculation is simply based off of the engine RPM accelerating up and then falling back down. That is how the ECU calculates from a dead stop. Okay, I've just now shifted and I'm in a different gear. It doesn't know. It just looks at the RPM drop and says I'm in a different gear. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is on this gear calculation, if I come over here to System, FSL Configuration, this is very important. If you're on BCP, if you're on stage, you need to go back to the way that you were here, okay? But to make this adjustment, come to gear over RPM, and you want to adjust this RPM drop in 50 millisecond loops for the gear shift, okay? So what this is doing, it's a 50 millisecond loop, and we're always looking at the engine RPM. If the engine RPM starts to fall dramatically, then we're going to say we're going into a different gear, okay? And I'm going to say that if you have a 3-speed, enter 3-speed here for the max number of gears that you have, okay? And this number should be around 250. 250 is a good number for calculation-wise for knowing which gear you're in. Now, again, very important. Once you've entered in your transmission, how many gears you have here, and this 250, make sure it's 250, go back to either BCP or stage, whatever you were at. Do not leave it on gear over RPM. Sometimes guys forget that. And the reason being is if I say I've got a 3-speed, well, you've now just enabled 3 fuel maps, 3 AFR maps, 3 ignition maps. This is a great way to run the engine, but if you don't want to run it this way, don't leave it on gear and RPM. We're gear underscore RPM. We just want to do it for configuring the number of gears you have and the actual gear shift RPM drop in 50 millisecond loops. When you're done, put it back. Okay. So now everything else applies the same. So now what's going to happen is we're going to use a gear calculation. We're not going to use that trans-desired gear. And then as you go into second gear, as you go into third gear, these numbers are going to be applied. It's very simple. You can add the CP condition as well if there are certain parameters for boost, TPS, whatever you want to do it. You can also add in the race timer as well. You're simply just choosing which way you want to calculate the gear for the retard to actually be applied. Okay? So again, just choose your mode, choose CP condition off or on. If you want to choose an SR2 timer, enable, and then enter in the number of gears and how much retard you want and how fast you want it back in. That's all you have to do. For the street mode, you're going to see here that it is always calculating off of the gear. So there is no other way for the street methodology to work, okay? Again, you're telling it it's a 3-speed, but it's always going to be working off of the same functionality of the gear calculation, which you have already set up here under System, FSL Configuration, Gear RPM. Again, you do not want to leave it on these tables. We just want to set it for the number of gears you have and the RPM drop in a 50 millisecond loops, which is around 250. Make sure it's back. And then what will happen here is every time you go into second gear or third gear, it'll apply that retard amount and ramp it back in over that much time. Okay? So the only thing you can do with the street mode is have the custom port editor. You won't have the SR2 timer there, which you technically could use the custom port editor if you want. But if I enabled that CP condition, okay, this retard could only happen if I came over here to custom port editor and again activated it and then configured this for my active conditions before this could technically work. So this, you can modify this logic with the custom port editor if you'd like to have minimum criteria or certain criteria before this actual retard can be applied. Okay, so I'm going to turn that back off, turn all this off, and now disable this custom port editor. And now in the street mode, I'm just simply back to every time it just changes gears, it's going to apply that retard. In your logs, you will see the timing going along and it'll just drop, indicating the retard amount has hit. You'll see it change when the gear calculation changes to the second gear, the third gear, and you should see it ramp back into whatever the appropriate timing in your timing target tables for this ramp back time. And that's it. So if you have any questions on the gear shift retards, please give us an email at support@bigstufftpm.com. You can check out our website, bigstufftpm.com. Feel free to give our office a call and make sure you check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Appreciate your time and check us out on the next helpful video. Thank you.